Hi guys, my name's Blue, and I'm a police officer in Miami with 10 years of experience. Today, we'll be talking about Ted Bundy, one of the most prolific serial killers in United States history. Join in as we unravel his crimes and attempt to find out if there were any major points in his life that he could have been stopped, be that from family, police, the court system, or so on. Hopefully, I can give you all an answer to our series' ultimate question: how did he get away with it for so long? First, let's start with the background of our subject. Ted Bundy was born Theodore Robert Cowell on November 24, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont. Bundy was born to his biological mother, Eleanor Louise Cowell, at the Elizabeth Lund Home for Unwed Mothers. His biological father is unknown, although Eleanor claims to have been with a war veteran named Jack Worthington, who left her shortly after she told him she was pregnant. Bundy and Eleanor would live with Bundy's grandparents, Samuel Cowell and Eleanor Longstreet. Due to the social stigma at the time surrounding unwed single mothers, Bundy was lied to and told that Samuel and his wife were Bundy's parents, and that Bundy's actual mother was his older sister. Bundy would later in life find out this was a lie and grow to resent his mother for this. Bundy did display some worrying behaviors as a very young child. Reportedly, when he was 3 years old, he snuck into his aunt's room, Julie Cowell, and began to slide kitchen knives into her bed beneath her covers. Julie awoke to this, and when she questioned Bundy about what he was doing, she claims he smiled and walked away. Bundy gave differing accounts of his family life growing up. In some instances, Bundy spoke very highly of his grandfather Samuel, and in others said that Samuel was a bully who beat his wife and his dog, and even allegedly threw his wife down a flight of stairs after an argument. In 1950, Eleanor moved to Tacoma, Washington, to live with her family members and get a fresh start. Here, she would meet Johnny Bundy at a singles church event in 1951. They married later that year, and Johnny would legally adopt Ted, officially giving him the name Bundy. In many cases, serial killers claim to have been abused by step-parents, but in this case, Bundy claims Johnny always included him, and that he didn't respect him because Johnny wasn't a real father and didn't make a lot of money. Bundy would gain 4 siblings from his mother's marriage. Here in Bundy's youth, we get another example of him giving different accounts of his childhood. Bundy would claim to rummage through trash cans in his free time, looking for pornographic magazines, and also claim that he was exposed to sexual violence through detective stories that he would read. However, later in his life he would claim he never read those detective novels, but that he was a peeping Tom, looking at neighborhood women through open bedroom windows while they undressed. Bundy also on one hand claimed to be distant from others, stating that he didn't understand friendships. On the other hand, Bundy was also very well known as being social and popular among students, and was an avid skier. Here we can see early on that Bundy had a propensity for crime. Bundy states that he would steal all of his ski equipment and forge ski lift tickets during this time of his life. During high school, Bundy would be arrested at least twice for burglary and theft of a motor vehicle, but these and any other records were expunged when he turned 18. However, we can see early on that Bundy is heading down a dark path and is not averse to committing crimes to get what he wants. Bundy would go on to graduate high school in 1965, and will go on to attend several universities. I will try my best to condense the next several years of his life. Bundy would go on to date a Diane Edwards, and after dropping out of college, working part-time jobs, Bundy would get involved in local politics, as he liked who it afforded him to be around. In late 1968, Diane would break up with Bundy, calling him immature and saying that he had no drive in his life. Bundy would report to be devastated by this. He would then travel around the country before arriving back in Washington, where he would meet single mother Elizabeth Clover. In 1970, Bundy goes back to college, this time as a psychology major. Here Bundy would become an honors student, and would even work as a suicide hotline operator during this time. Bundy again became involved in politics and used his connections to get into the law program at University of Utah. Bundy would rekindle his relationship with the woman who had broken his heart, Diane Edwards, who was impressed at Bundy's potential to be both a lawyer and a politician. Bundy lived a double life, and dated both her and Elizabeth during this time, unbeknownst to either woman. Bundy, in 1974, would abruptly break things off with Diane, which he later explained as wanting vengeance on her. Here's where things start to go off the rails. Bundy, in April of 1974, would stop attending classes at law school, and young women had just started to disappear in the Pacific Northwest. Here we can go over the difficulties of dealing with a subject like Bundy. It is unknown exactly when or where he started killing, as again, he would give different accounts to different people after his arrest. Even when he admitted to dozens of murders, he still refused to speak on some of his earliest ones, citing that he didn't want to hurt his loved ones who would have been hurt by knowing that he caused that particular victim's death, or that they were too young to mention. We should note here that a trend we have seen in the serial killers we've covered is pedophilia, and it's one we're going to see again and again as we cover more. So for starters, here are just a few examples of the differing accounts Bundy gave to different people. Bundy would state his first attempted kidnapping of a woman was in 1969 in New Jersey, and that he did not kill his first until sometime in 1971. Bundy then would tell a psychologist, Art Norman, that he killed 2 women in Atlantic City while visiting a family in 1969. Bundy would then tell a homicide detective, Robert Keppel, that he killed a woman in Seattle in 1972 and a hitchhiker in 1973, but wouldn't give further details. Here we will go off what detectives and the Bundy Task Force have put forth as his actual number of victims, and use their dates and times. However, it is important to note that investigators do believe Bundy murdered many more than officially thought. January 4th, 1974. Karen Sparks would become Bundy's first officially known victim. Sparks, who was a political science student at the University of Washington, was asleep at home when she was attacked by Bundy. According to Sparks, she was awoken when Bundy began to beat her repeatedly over the head with a part of her bed frame that he had taken off of it. When Sparks was unconscious, Bundy would violate her with this object. Bundy used such force that her bladder was split open from the attack. Bundy would then leave her for dead, and Sparks would be found by her roommate nearly a day later, who assumed Sparks was sleeping. Sparks survived, but suffered brain damage and has hearing and vision loss from the attack to this day. February 1st, 1974. Here is the first proven murder of Bundy's. Linda Ann Healy, another student at University of Washington, would be reported missing after not showing up for work. Healy was a weather reporter for a local radio station, and after not showing up for work, she was reported missing by her roommate. Police would respond, and an inspection of the room showed it to be very clean, with the bed even having been made. However, blood would be found on the pillow, and on a nightgown hidden in the closet. Police would interview over 60 people, but Healy would not be found until her body was discovered on Taylor Mountain in 1975, alongside several other women's bodies. Bundy would later recount his actions this night. He snuck into the home while Healy was sleeping, and struck her over the head with a tire iron. Bundy then reports changing her into a pair of jeans and a white shirt before taking her from the home. All the while, Healy's roommate shared a wall with her and reported hearing no disturbances or any noises whatsoever the entire night. March 12, 1974. Donna Gail Manson. Donna was a 19-year-old student at Evergreen State College in South Seattle. Donna disappeared on her way to a concert, which was less than 200 yards away from her dormitory. According to roommates, she seemed overly concerned with her appearance, changing outfits several times, although she had not mentioned to them having a date. I'm going to place a picture on the screen now to show you just how close Donna was to her destination. In it, you can see her dorm, and the only route she normally took to the college activities building. According to a GPS estimate, this route would take less than 2 minutes to walk. It is another terrifying example of how effective Bundy was at taking these women with such a small window of opportunity. Unfortunately, it would take 6 days for Donna to be reported missing, putting police well behind before their investigation even began. This was apparently due to Donna being described as a free spirit, who would routinely disappear for days at a time on hitchhiking trips. Newspapers wouldn't report her disappearance to the public for 10 days. Police would team up with the community, searching the college grounds on 4 separate occasions. For each search, up to 200 people would turn up and assist, and yet despite this, not a single clue would be found. To investigators, Donna would be yet another woman seemingly to vanish into thin air. Donna's body would never be recovered, and Bundy would later confess to burning her skull in his girlfriend Liz's fireplace. Bundy stated, "Liz isn't going to forgive me for that." April 17, 1974. Susan Rancourt. Susan was an 18-year-old student at Central Washington University campus. Unlike most of Bundy's other victims, Susan was a blonde. Here's what we know about this night. At 8 p.m., Susan put a load of laundry into a communal washer and left for a meeting at Munson Hall. At 10 p.m., the meeting finished, and Susan left to finish her laundry and then meet a friend afterwards for a movie. However, Susan would never make it back to her laundry. Family and friends would sound the alarm almost immediately, as Susan was not known as the type of person to just disappear without reason. Both college police and officers from the Kittitas County Sheriff's Office came to search, and were joined by explorer scouts from 4 different counties. As with the other women, multiple people from the entire community came to help and spent days searching. With no evidence to be found, the search would be called off on the 4th day. Another woman who just vanished, and authorities didn't have a single shred of evidence. May 6, 1974. Roberta Parks was a 20-year-old college student at Oregon State University. According to friends, Roberta was having an emotional day, as she had recently received news that her dad had suffered a heart attack. Roberta was walking around campus and stopped to chat with a friend about an upcoming test. The friend would later tell police. Roberta would say that she was going to get a hot fudge sundae, and this would be the last time she was seen alive. The next morning, roommates became worried when they noticed she had not come home. Due to a rule that all girls had to be back in their dorms by 2 a.m., they were initially hesitant to report that she had not returned, as they did not want to get her in trouble. But after several hours, worry got the better of them. They would say that this was due to their knowledge of the 3 other women that had gone missing in the Seattle area, even though they were 250 miles away. Roberta was reported missing, and again, no evidence would be found of a crime being committed. To the contrary, it was reported that Roberta was having issues with depression and mental health, and as such, foul play was not suspected. That is, until her body would be discovered with the bodies of 3 other women on Taylor Mountain. May 31st, 1974. Brenda Ball was a 22-year-old college student who had just finished classes and was enjoying summer break at the Flame Tavern, where she was a regular customer. Witnesses would state that Brenda stayed at the bar until it closed at 2 a.m. Brenda asked a band member for a ride home, but they refused as they were traveling in an opposite direction. There are 2 stories that witnesses gave detectives about what happened next. One, that Brenda left by herself and stated she was going to hitchhike home. Another, that says she left the bar with an unidentified man. Whatever route she took, it intersected with Bundy's that night. An all too common failure would hinder this investigation, and that would be that Brenda was not reported missing for over 2 weeks. Friends claim Brenda was known to party and disappear for days at a time, but after speaking to family who also had not heard from her, Brenda would finally be reported missing. Unfortunately, Brenda's disappearance did not fit the mold of the very early modus operandi that was being developed for Bundy, and no link was seen initially. Now, let's talk about how many of these crimes would be linked to Bundy later on. In some cases, Bundy would give a confession. In others, Bundy would speak about the case in the third person, so as not to incriminate himself. This is by his own admission. In this case, when asked about Brenda, Bundy theorized that the killer could have changed his MO by picking up a hitchhiker, further making it difficult for police to tie the murders together. Bundy claimed that this is indeed what the killer did, taking Brenda back to his home where they allegedly had consensual sex, after which the killer would strangle her as she slept. So let's take a break and ask at this point, what could law enforcement have done? In all honesty, at this point, it's easy to see why Bundy has been so successful. The sad truth is, we live in 2 different worlds today compared to back then, just based on technology. Going back, if someone was abducted and there were no witnesses, that was often all the police had to go on. No ring cameras, no toll booths recording license plates, no cell phones to ping on a cell tower and place a person in the area, nothing. It's very difficult to investigate anything like that when all you have is a time frame that person was last seen. However, that was quickly changing. Bundy was exceptionally bold in the commission of his crimes, attempting to lure multiple victims and even staying in the same area after he was rejected, hunting for others. Eventually, in the subsequent investigations, a pattern would emerge. In each case except for Brenda, a man in a cast or a sling would be seen loitering around and asking women for help. While no one saw that man with these missing women, it's too much of a coincidence to ignore when it happens at each crime scene. Police used this to begin to shape a suspect profile, but it wouldn't be until a later murder that a description would finally be released to the public. June 11th, 1974. Georgianne Hawkins was an 18-year-old college student at the University of Washington, Seattle. On the night of her disappearance, she would last be seen walking from her boyfriend's fraternity house on campus, heading to her own sorority dorm, just 6 houses or 90 feet apart. The path she took to get there was a well-lit alleyway that normally had lots of college students along it. Many of the fraternity and sorority houses were partying, and many other students were up late studying for finals. Despite all of this, Georgianne would disappear somewhere along this 90-foot path back home. When she didn't arrive home by 3 a.m., her roommate who had been waiting up for her contacted the campus police. It was considered standard police procedure to wait 24 hours before a report and investigation would be done into a missing person. However, both students and police were aware of the media depictions of the killing by now, and Georgianne fit the profile of the victims perfectly. As such, this report was immediately taken and investigated, as well as released to the media. Despite this, Georgianne's body would never be found, and even with Bundy confessing to her murder, she is still officially listed as a missing person to this day. Later on, Bundy would give an absolutely heartbreaking account of what he did to her that night. Bundy lured her by pretending to be injured and asked for help to his car. Georgianne offered to carry his briefcase, and when she bent over to put it in his car, he struck her over the head with a crowbar, knocking her out and abducting her. While driving, he states that Georgianne woke up and started asking him questions about her upcoming Spanish test, believing that he was her tutor. Bundy, ever the monster, responded by striking her again with the crowbar, knocking her out once more. She was then raped, strangled, and her body was disposed of in a secluded area. July 14th, 1974. 2 more college students, Janice Ott and Denise Mashand, disappear from Lake Sammamish State Park in Seattle, just 4 hours apart. Witnesses would recall seeing a young man with his arm in a sling asking the woman to help him move his boat. This description would match those of a man seen at several nearby schools where females had gone missing. This would be the last murder of Bundy's in Washington state. Bundy's spree, however, had only begun, and would continue in several other states across the U.S. After releasing a description of the male seen here, Bundy's name would be mentioned to police by his girlfriend, Elizabeth Clofer, and 3 friends and co-workers of Bundy's at the same time. Clofer would claim Bundy had a habit of following people late at night, including sorority girls. She further claims that she saw a bowl of house keys, women's underwear, and a knife in Bundy's car. She told officers a story that after she heard about the disappearances in the news, she noticed Bundy had left a family event with her early one night and came late to another function the next day, the same night that Brenda Ball would later be reported missing. However, police were swamped by dozens and dozens of tips and names being given. They did a background on Bundy, which came back clean, showing no criminal record, and he was dismissed early on as a suspect due to this and the fact that he was a known law student. Further, he had no known connection to any of the victims that would make him stand out, such as being an ex-boyfriend or perhaps a business partner. It was not believed that he fit a profile that police would at the time commonly associate with a kidnapper or murderer. On August 30th, 1974, Bundy would move back to Utah once again to continue his studies at law school. October 2nd, 1974. Nancy Wilcox was a 16-year-old high school student, gone missing after going to the store to buy gum. She would remain missing until Bundy confessed to raping and killing her before his execution, claiming to have buried her in Capitol Reef National Park. She would never be found. October 18th, 1974. Melissa Smith, the 17-year-old daughter of Police Chief Lewis Smith. Melissa would be abducted after leaving a pizza parlor after meeting with friends in Midvale, Utah. Her case would be unsolved until Bundy would include her name in a confession before his execution. Melissa's death would mark the beginning of Bundy's spree in Utah. October 31st, 1974. Laura Ann Amy was a 17-year-old high schooler who had recently dropped out and was attending a Halloween party with friends. Laura was also not living with family at this time, but was working odd part-time jobs and couch surfing at different friends' homes. Family and friends described her as a wanderer who was just trying to figure her life out. At some point, Laura stated she was leaving the party and may hitchhike somewhere else. Laura would disappear from this time and become yet another victim to Bundy. Laura had never been reported missing when her body was discovered in American Fort Canyon in Utah, naked and left for the animals and elements to destroy. Because authorities were not even aware of Laura's disappearance, they initially assumed her body was the body belonging to a 17-year-old Deborah Kent. An interesting note here. In cases where Bundy was questioned about the murder of any juvenile females, he would often admit to it without divulging many details, unlike his other crimes on adults. In fact, one reason the FBI believes Bundy's kill count to be much higher than the reported is due to Bundy himself admitting to many more murders, but in some, refusing to elaborate because the victims were just too young. November 8th, 1974. Bundy would impersonate a police officer in Murray, Utah. His intended target is 18-year-old Carol DeRanche. Bundy would approach her in a mall and identify herself as a cop, informing her that a car had been broken into. Carol would follow Bundy outside, and seeing that her car was fine, would be asked by Bundy to come to the station and answer questions for him regarding another crime. Carol would accompany Bundy, and after entering Bundy's tan VW Beetle, would grow suspicious. When Carol grew angry and demanded to know where Bundy was taking her, he would slap a handcuff on her wrist and threaten to shoot her if she resisted. Carol, however, would bravely fight off Bundy, scratching at his eyes and hitting him, until she was able to get out of the car and get away on foot. Later that same day, Bundy would successfully lure and kill a 17-year-old Deborah Kent. Bundy abducted her in front of her school, where her parents, who were there with her to attend a school play, asked her to pick up her younger brother from a skating rink. Karen's parents would leave a short time later and still see the car in the parking lot, letting them know Kent had not left on their own. Kent was reported missing that day, but would not be found until Bundy admitted to the killing in the final days leading up to his execution. Bundy admitted to taking her back to his house, something he says he never did, for about 24 hours. When asked by police if she was alive that entire time, he would think to himself for a moment and then coldly say, about half of it. Bundy would show investigators where he buried Kent, and several bags of bones could be found there. However, the only thing that was found to be human was a kneecap. This was given to her family, and DNA testing in 2015 would confirm that it belonged to Kent. Bundy never revealed what happened to the rest of her body. January 12, 1975. Karen Campbell was a nurse, and was engaged to Dr. Raymond Godowski. The two, accompanied by two of Godowski's young children, had taken a trip to Aspen, Colorado, so Godowski could attend a cardiology conference. One evening while there, the four of them were relaxing in the lounge of the Wildwood Inn, where Karen decided to go up to her bedroom to get a magazine she wanted to read. On the way to the room, Karen would run into a group of doctors from the conference and have a conversation with them, per the doctor's later account. Karen then continued on towards her hotel room. This would be the last time anyone would see Karen, until her naked body was discovered on February 17th, 36 days later. Her body was only 8 yards from the side of the highway, and Karen's body had simply been left to the elements. Let's take a second and talk about the investigative process. When Karen didn't return after a short while from the hotel room, Godowski began to worry she had fallen or hurt herself and went on to the room. Godowski would find the room empty, and noticed the magazine Karen wanted was still in the room. As Karen was nowhere to be found, he called the Aspen Police Department to report her missing. While the police initially believed that Karen just went out to a local bar and would return later, Godowski knew this to be out of character for her and stated as much. As we discussed earlier, an old policy of most police departments, in the case of everyone but young children, was often to wait 24 to 48 hours before reporting a person missing, as it was believed that they likely just went out and would be back. And in 90% of cases, this turned out to be correct. But when Karen had not returned by the following morning, Aspen police decided to investigate this disappearance more thoroughly. Even in Aspen, the news of young adult females disappearing in several states in the Pacific Northwest had been heard. Over 100 people at the lodge were interviewed. Despite an early delay, police hit this investigation hard, going the distance to interview every single person at the lodge to try and get some understanding of what had happened. Despite this, not a single person would report seeing anything suspicious. In many of these murders, Bundy was incredibly bold and almost seemed to move like a ghost. He also seems to have gotten incredibly lucky in many instances, something that contributed to the success of his crimes. But how did Bundy get away with this in such a place, where 100 witnesses were present? Well, as we have seen, Bundy used numerous ruses to trick his victims. In some instances, he would approach women on crutches and ask them to help him carry something to his car. Sometimes he would use a fake cast instead of crutches. During the abduction attempt of Carol DeRanche, he pretended to be a police detective. He even showed her a fake badge. In other instances, Bundy also stated he would ask women to help him start his car. For instance, on the night that he abducted Deborah Kent, he approached several women and asked them to come outside and help him identify a vehicle. A news article by reporter David Price may offer us some answers. Price reports on an interview between Bundy and District Attorney Michael Fisher, where Bundy was questioned about his involvement in the Campbell murder. Bundy would go on to state that Karen was not his intended victim. He was loitering around the lodge on a pair of crutches, visibly struggling to carry a pair of ski boots. Bundy stated that his intended victim walked right past him and paid no attention to him, a move which likely saved her life. Bundy states that Karen saw him while walking on the second floor and came down to assist him, a move perfectly in line with her nature as a nurse. This explains why she never made it back to the room. Bundy asks Karen to help him out to his car, and when they arrive there, he strikes her on the back of the head with the ski boot, knocking her out and abducting her. In almost every case, we know that Bundy sexually assaulted his victims, both before and after their death, sometimes coming back to do it again and again until the body reached too advanced a state of decomposition. In this case, Bundy did not want to say if he had or had not sexually assaulted Karen. Bundy would be brought to stand trial for the murder in 1977, and would escape jail not once, but twice. We'll get into that in greater detail in just a little bit. Before we delve deeper into the rest of the tragically long list of Bundy's victims, I want to show you all a graphic that will help put into perspective the scale and distance of his crimes. Here you can see every known Bundy murder by state, with the years included. You see, Bundy, as a law student, knew that interdepartmental communication was basically non-existent at this time, with rare exception. Basically, no departments talked to each other, and information about crimes in one department would not be reported to another department. As we discussed in my last video on John Wayne Gacy, NCIC, or the National Crime Information Center, would not be founded until 1967, and it would take in some cases decades to get all police agencies equipped with this, especially the smaller ones. Bundy, to some extent, knew about this weakness. Bundy would travel around state to state, committing 1 to 2 murders, then leaving for another part of the state, or another state entirely for his next ones. This tactic worked, at least initially, and it wasn't until a dozen or more victims disappeared in that region of the US that departments would start to suspect one person was behind them all, especially considering that most of these women had identical looks. That is, slim, white females with long black hair parted in the middle. I'll include a pic of many of his victims here so you see what I'm talking about. In this case, many departments started paying attention when the news reports regarding missing women and women found dead began to pile up. March 1st, 1975. The remains of Healy, Rancourt, Parks, and Ball would be found on Taylor Mountain back in Washington. At this time, Bundy was still in Utah. Police are just now beginning to understand just how bad this is and how bad it is likely to get. March 15th, 1975. Julie Cunningham was a 26-year-old ski instructor in Vail, Colorado. Julie had last spoken to her mother on the phone about going through a rough breakup and had told her mom she was meeting her roommate at a nearby tavern to hang out and take her mind off of things. Tragically, as we know, Julie did not make it to the tavern that night, which was within walking distance. At some point, she crossed paths with the monster that is Bundy. There is little information as to when Julie was reported missing and what steps were taken. Again, the only reason many of these are linked to Bundy is because he was asked about any women who went missing around the time he was active and who fit the preferred look of his victims, just like Julie did. Bundy would use the same old trick, pretending to be injured to get the attention of Julie, a kind-hearted person like so many of his victims. It worked, and Bundy claims to have hit her in the back of the head with a crowbar, handcuffing her and putting her in the trunk. Bundy would then take her on a 90-minute drive to Rifle, Colorado, where he then raped, strangled, and buried her. But he would not elaborate further on the area, and despite numerous attempts made, Julie's body would never be recovered. April 6th. Denise Oliverson was last seen riding her bike away from her home she shared with a boyfriend. Denise would be reported missing the next day, but Bundy would not confess to this one until just minutes before his execution. Bundy claims to have abducted, strangled, and raped her, and ultimately disposed of her body in the Colorado River. May 6th, 1975. Lynette Dawn Culver, an innocent 12-year-old girl, would be abducted by Bundy in Pocatello, Idaho. At the time, police and family believed she had run away to a Native American reservation, but as time passed, foul play was suspected. It becomes exhausting to say, but again, her remains would never be found. Bundy once again confessed just before his execution, saying he abducted her and took her to a Holiday Inn, where she was raped and drowned in a bathtub. Her body would be dumped in the nearby Snake River. June 27, 1975. Susan Curtis was a 15-year-old girl from Bountiful, Utah. Susan had ridden her bicycle 50 miles to Provo just to attend a youth conference at Brigham Young University. It took her 2 days to do this, which is incredible for an average teenager. Susan was last seen heading back to her room alone, but police believe she never made it back. Bundy later confessed to this murder, leaving the details out but claiming that he buried her along a stretch of highway in Prince, Utah. August 16, 1975. This would be Bundy's first encounter with police as a murderer. Highway Patrol Sergeant Bob Hayward attempts to stop Bundy, who was driving his signature tan Volkswagen Beetle at 2 a.m. I would like to highlight this example of proactive police work by Sergeant Hayward, who decided to make the stop after seeing Bundy drive the area repeatedly, looking as if he was casing the area. Casing is a term used by police to describe criminals who loiter in an area for an extended period of time to commit some type of criminal activity, such as robbery or burglary. In this case, Bundy had much worse in mind. After Bundy turned off his headlights and attempted to flee, he was eventually stopped in a gas station parking lot. The sergeant noticed Bundy's front passenger seat was missing. In the trunk, he found a pair of handcuffs, a crowbar, a ski mask, a rope, a belt, an ice pick, and other random items. Bundy would be placed under arrest for fleeing and eluding and possession of burglary tools. Observant as these cops were, it did not go unnoticed that Bundy's appearance and his car matched the descriptions given by Carol DeRanche, the one who got away from Bundy earlier. The items in Bundy's car were also consistent with what Carol described seeing. Carol was able to pick Bundy out of a lineup as the man who had attempted to abduct her. At this time, authorities also believed they had the man responsible for the murders in several states. Here's where Bundy's reign should have ended. So, let's talk about what happened next, and examine the major failing of courthouse deputies that led to more death and carnage. In March of 1976, Bundy was convicted of aggravated kidnapping and sentenced to 1 to 15 years in prison. Here, I would like to take a minute and praise Carol DeRanche for following through. Not only did she report this crime, she was able to pick Bundy out of a lineup, she testified at his trial and didn't back down even when Bundy himself questioned her on the stand, which must have been a truly nerve-wracking experience. She did everything right to try and ensure Bundy would never hurt anyone again, and yet Bundy would, due to the negligence of courtroom procedures and officers. After this trial, Bundy would be extradited to Colorado to answer for the murder of Karen Campbell. You see, police had not given up and had been able to put Bundy in the area at the time of multiple murders in Colorado. In addition to that, a strand of Karen's hair had been discovered in his car, ultimately resulting in him being charged in her murder. June 7, 1977. Because Bundy chose to represent himself, he did not have to be shackled in the courtroom. When a recess was announced, Bundy requested to study in the courthouse library and was allowed. However, there is no reason here that he should not have been shackled and under the watchful eyes of 2 armed guards, especially considering his crimes. Instead, guards would lock Bundy in the library, which had numerous unlocked windows. The guards themselves would stay outside of the library, going for a smoke break. Sounds like a great idea, right? Not only was Bundy left completely alone, but his disappearance would not be noticed until everyone returned to the courtroom, and the judge asked where Bundy was. But at this time, he already had a 30-minute head start on police. He had jumped out of the second-story courtroom window and was already in the nearby woods. Bundy would stay at large for 6 days, breaking into hunting cabins and stealing food, guns, and clothing. He eventually stole a car and was stopped in town after officers observed Bundy driving recklessly. He claims that this escape was not planned, that it was spur of the moment. However, Bundy had several maps of the area in his possession, implying that he had indeed been planning this escape. Bundy would then be taken and held at Glenwood Springs. I would like to note here how close Bundy came to possibly beating this murder charge. The evidence against him was considered weak at best, and Bundy was being advised by multiple friends who were lawyers to stay in jail. At multiple evidentiary hearings, the judge was ruling that evidence would be suppressed in Bundy's favor quite often, and if he beat this charge, it was highly unlikely that other prosecutors would have tried him for additional murders. Bundy would not listen to this advice and escape again, fleeing to Florida, where his actions would ultimately seal his fate. Bundy began to plan his next escape. He would lose 30 pounds in several months, starving himself to be able to fit in a 1 square foot hole in his ceiling that he would cut with a hacksaw he received from other inmates, along with blueprints of the facility and $500 cash, which was smuggled in by Carol Ann Boone over numerous visits. Boone believed Bundy was innocent, despite the growing mountain of evidence. In the small town, Bundy had become a celebrity, and as such wanted to file a venue change in the hopes of gaining favor with people who were unfamiliar with his case in Denver. On December 23rd, his request was granted. Rather, instead of Denver, to Colorado Springs, where juries historically were known to be tough on accused murderers. Bundy knew he had to make his move. On the night of December 30th, 1977, most of the staff was on Christmas break, and the jail was being run on a skeleton crew. Even non-violent prisoners had been allowed to furlough with their families. As you can see in the picture I'll show now, Bundy piled books onto his bed and covered it with a blanket, to make it seem as if he was sleeping. He then cut a hole into the roof with a hacksaw, and wedging his slim frame into the very small opening, made his escape. Bundy would take the ventilation ducts to the empty apartment of the chief jailer, which was connected to the jail. Here, he would change into civilian clothing taken from the jailer's own closet, and walk right out of the door, once more a free man. Infuriatingly enough, a fellow prisoner would report hearing noises in the ceiling several times to the guard on duty, but this was never investigated. Yet another chance to stop Bundy gone to waste, allowing him to escape not once but twice. These people all share responsibility in what would come next. Bundy stole a car and began to drive to Tallahassee, Florida, with a substantial lead, as he wasn't discovered missing for 17 hours. Initially vowing to stay out of trouble and stop killing, Bundy attempted to get jobs, but without ID was unable to, leading him to resorting to petty thefts to survive. Bundy was not able to suppress who he truly was, a murderous monster of a human being. Bundy, being filled with rage, especially after having his life come crashing down on him and his crimes exposed by the testimony of DeRanche, decided that others needed to pay. As such, just a week after arriving to Florida, Bundy would kill again. In the early hours of January 15, 1978, Bundy would enter the rear door of an FSU sorority thanks to a broken lock. At approximately 2:45 a.m., Bundy would bludgeon his next sleeping victims to death, a 21-year-old Margaret Bowman with a piece of oak firewood, ultimately strangling her with a nylon stocking. The next to fall victim would be 20-year-old Lisa Levy, sleeping in just the next room. Lisa would be badly beaten, have her nipple nearly bitten off, and be violated with a hairspray canister. Here, Bundy would leave a deep bite wound on Lisa's left buttock. This would come into play later. Bundy moved to another bedroom, incredibly not having woken anyone up this entire time. In the adjoining bedroom was Kathy Kleiner, who shared a room with Karen Chandler. Bundy attacked Kathy, breaking her jaw and lacerating her shoulder. Karen was immediately attacked upon waking up and suffered a broken finger, jaw, and a concussion on top of losing several teeth. Karen and Kathy would survive, thanks to headlights illuminating the bedroom through the window, causing Bundy to flee. Despite the attack not being heard by any of the other 30 members of the sorority who were sleeping, Bundy would not escape into thin air this time. He would be seen leaving by Nita Neary, who was just coming home. Police would later determine Bundy had attacked all 4 women in less than 15 minutes, but Bundy's rage had not been satisfied yet. He would break into a basement apartment 8 blocks away, attacking another FSU student, Cheryl Thomas, dislocating her shoulder and fracturing her skull in 5 places. This time, neighbors would hear the attack and call police, who would discover Cheryl, badly beaten but alive. Cheryl would suffer permanent hearing and equilibrium damage, ending her dance career. On Cheryl's bed, police discovered a semen stain and a pantyhose mask, and 2 hairs that later would be connected to Bundy inside the mask. I wish I could tell you that this was the end of his rampage. I'm growing wary of recounting all his crimes to you, especially knowing that he should not have been able to do this, had he been locked away in a truly proper jail with competent guards. But one more life was yet to be taken before Bundy could truly be brought to justice. 3 weeks after the FSU attacks, Bundy attempted and failed to abduct the 14-year-old daughter of the Jacksonville Police Department's Chief of Detectives, Leslie Palmer. Bundy would backtrack 60 miles, where he would encounter the last person he would ever be able to harm, 12-year-old Kimberly Leach. Kimberly was taken from her junior high school, seemingly vanishing into thin air like so many before her. Her partially mummified remains would be discovered after 7 weeks of intensive searching, hidden on a pig farm. It was determined she had been raped, and that he had cut her throat. 4 days after her murder, Bundy began to suspect police were onto him, so he stole another vehicle and fled west along the Florida Panhandle. 3 days later, he was stopped while driving a stolen vehicle. Another great example of proactive police work, as Pensacola officer David Lee would be the one to finally end Bundy's reign of terror. When Officer Lee attempted to arrest him, Bundy knocked him down and took off running. Lee would fire 2 warning shots before running him down and forcibly taking him into custody. In Bundy's vehicle were 3 IDs belonging to the victims of the FSU attacks, along with numerous stolen credit cards. Unbeknownst to Officer Lee, he had just arrested one of the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives. In June of 1979, Bundy's luck had run out. No more incompetent officers. No more courtrooms or jails to escape from. No more people to help him escape. Bundy, finally, would stand accountable for his crimes. This trial was such big news that it would be the first to be televised nationally in the United States. Over 250 reporters from 5 different countries followed the trial daily. Bundy would be found guilty under a crushing wave of evidence, including witness testimony from Nita Neary, who saw Bundy leaving the home with the murder weapon, and 2 forensic orthodontists, Richard Sauvan and Lau Levine. Their contributions cannot be praised enough. At this time, most courts did not allow or recognize forensic dentistry as evidence, as it was such a new field. Despite that, their expert testimony proved beyond a reasonable doubt that the bite wound left on Levy's buttock, that we mentioned earlier, matched perfectly with the mold taken of Bundy's teeth. There was no denying or charming his way out of this case. The jury would take just 7 hours to deliberate, and on July 24, 1979, Ted Bundy would be found guilty and sentenced to death. Many experts believe that had it not been for Bundy being convicted in his Florida crimes, he likely would have beaten the other murder cases, and not ever had to face justice in this life. 6 months later, a second trial took place in Orlando for the abduction and murder of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach. After less than 8 hours of deliberation, Bundy would be found guilty and sentenced to an additional death sentence as justice for Leach. Despicably, during this trial, Bundy married longtime girlfriend Carol Ann Boone. Boone would never face charges for helping Bundy escape, incredibly enough. She will forever hold the weight of knowing she has a direct responsibility for the victims he killed after his escape. However, Boone would eventually divorce Bundy when he began to confess to the other murders. So let's discuss Bundy's interviews and confessions. Bundy, while waiting for the electric chair, would confess to many of the murders he is known for committing today. However, I want to point something out at this time. Bundy would only ever stand trial and be convicted of 3 murders, despite admitting to killing 30 women. The reason for this was because prosecutors didn't see a point in going through a trial, even with this confession, as it would be seen as both a waste of taxpayer dollars and also could be used to delay Bundy's execution with appeals in multiple states. Most jurisdictions just use his confession to close cases on missing persons, attempting to find the bodies and give families whatever closure they could get. We've outlined the majority of his confessions during our section on his victims and crimes earlier, but Bundy would say that he was an impulse killer for years before he became, by his own words, an actual predator around the murder of Healy in 1974. This was a chilling admission, as it is the main reason the FBI today believes that Bundy is responsible for many more unknown murders in his early years. Of his 30 confessed victims, several of that number remain unknown to this day. Bundy would go on to say that he was a Christian, and that he was indeed sorrowful for what he had done. Let's have a look at this interview of his shortly before his execution.
Can you help me understand this desensitization process that took place? What was going on in your mind?
Well, by desensitization, I describe it in specific terms is that each time I'd harm someone, each time I'd kill someone, there'd be an enormous amount, especially at first, enormous amount of horror, guilt, remorse afterwards. But then that impulse to do it again would come back even stronger. Now, believe me, I didn't. The unique thing about how this worked, Dr. Dobson, is that I still felt in my regular life the full range of guilt and remorse about other things, regret and...
But you had this compartmentalized...
This compartmentalized, very well-focused, very sharply focused area where it was like a black hole. It was like a, like a crack, and everything that fell into that crack just disappeared. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. One of the final murders that you committed, of course, was apparently little Kimberly Leach, 12 years of age. I think the public outcry is greater there because an innocent child was taken from a playground. What did you feel after that? Were there the normal emotions 3 days later? Where were you, Ted?
I can't really talk about that right now. That's
too painful.
I would like to be able to convey to you what that experience is like, but I can't. I won't be able to talk about that.
Okay.
As you can see, Bundy is articulate and always appears thoughtful and intelligent. Again, easy to see how he could be so convincing to other people. Yet it's always after the news breaks that people claim to be able to see how evil someone was in their eyes. And yet, it's hard not to imagine that when you watch this interview. The constant laughing, the corners of his mouth curling into a smile no matter what he's asked about. The only time this facade falls is when he is asked about Leach, and his face turns very cold and hard for a moment. A very eerie thing to see, knowing what we know. So, who was at fault here? What were the major failings? As we discussed, there were many to be had. But primarily, for Bundy's first 8 victims, there sadly wasn't much that could have been done. Bundy simply wasn't on anyone's radar yet. If you remember, Bundy's girlfriend Clover told police she suspected Bundy was behind the murders. Remember, at that time, Bundy was ruled out early on, but it was a mistake. Bundy moved to Utah for law school around this time, but once missing women were reported and bodies began to be found there, Clover again contacted police and claimed Bundy was behind it. At this point, Bundy had jumped to the top of their suspect list just before his first arrest. Once arrested, he was linked to more serious crimes, and the police in those cases did everything right to ensure they built a good case against Bundy and secured a conviction, which they did. These officers should be commended, including the late Bob Hayward. However, our greatest failures were the simplest to avoid. Bundy should never have been left alone in the library, but the even greater failing was the escape from a weak and understaffed jail. It was this escape, assisted by Boone, that would result in the murders, the beatings, the rapes, and the kidnapping that would occur in Florida. It shows negligence on the hand of officials at the jail, both for letting him escape and also for letting Boone smuggle in the items needed to allow Bundy to survive as a free man for so long. Sometimes we see failings in the reporting or investigation of missing persons, but here we don't really see much of that. In several instances, dozens or hundreds of community members assisted police in a search for missing persons that took place immediately, and dozens or hundreds of people would be interviewed in the following days. Sadly, unless you had an eyewitness who had actual information about the crime, there just wasn't much to go off of, especially without cameras. This was one of the reasons the 70s was considered the so-called golden days for serial killers. Many of them may as well have been ghosts, especially with the lack of forensic knowledge and interdepartmental communication. Perhaps if Bundy had been questioned the first time Clover mentioned his name to police, something could have been done. But even later, the prosecutors in that jurisdiction would admit they had very weak cases against Bundy, and it's entirely possible he wouldn't have even been charged. And once he would have moved to another jurisdiction, he likely would have fallen off their radar, at least for a little while. I would like to take a moment here and talk about Bundy's so-called trial groupies, a term made for the young college-age women who would attend his trials. Interviews with them, such as the one I am about to play, show how easily deceived people can be by someone who appears normal. This may also be the same reason police initially overlooked Bundy when they were first told about him.
Each day, the courtroom is filled with spectators drawn by a fascination with Theodore Bundy himself or by the gruesome details of the crimes. Blood-stained pillows, pictures of the murdered co-eds, evidence that the women were sexually abused. What is unusual to see is that many of the onlookers are women, young women, contemporaries of the 5 Florida State sorority sisters who were assaulted in their beds a year and a half ago.
Every time he turns around, I kind of get that feeling, oh no, he's gonna get me next,
But yet you're fascinated by him.
Very, very. Every night when I go to bed, I just, I get very scared. I shut my door and lock it,
I'm not afraid of him. He just doesn't look like the type to kill somebody.
You try to imagine yourself in his place and to see how he's feeling looking at the pillows with blood stains and everything, and if he really did it or not.
The trial has drawn women from as far away as Seattle, where Bundy is suspected of other sex murders. Why is this happening? According to one psychiatrist, it is a mixture of fear, intrigue, and in particular, sexual attraction.
And so, yes, I do think this is, in an underlying sense, a sexual attraction, using that word very broadly for the moment. But there is no question but what violence does quicken the pulse of many people, and certainly of young women.
The young women themselves aren't too sure what it is that attracts them to the trial. Are you a little scared when you look at him?
Yes, it scares me to be in the same room with them, but I know there's other people in there, so.
Why do you do it?
I don't know.
Robin Lloyd for CBS News, Miami.
As you can see, they clearly had some type of obsession or morbid curiosity about him. In all these cases, we should really be focusing on the victims, on the tragedy that befell them, on the impact it had on the lives and the community around them, and what we can do to avoid those things in the future. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. This one was very in-depth, and I apologize for the length. I just didn't feel right leaving anything out, as I really wanted to give you all as deep a dive as I could on Bundy, identifying every area that he could have been stopped, as well as all his victims. Leave any feedback or recommendations you have in the comments, and if you like the content, subscribe for more. We'll have weekly uploads, and I have some really interesting cases for you guys in the next few weeks. So stay tuned and stay safe.